Human accidentally matched warm breath with an alien girl. The meaning she explained was beautiful. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. John Miller had always been someone who appreciated the quiet life. A simple man with simple pleasures, he had never imagined that a small accident could change his life so drastically. He was stationed on the planet Aurelian, a world known for its strange fauna and unique inhabitants. John, a maintenance technician, spent most of his days fixing various equipment, from electrical systems to environmental controls, ensuring that everything ran smoothly for the crew stationed there. It was on one of those routine tasks that he encountered her. Aurelia, a young alien woman with radiant violet eyes and shimmering blue skin, was part of the research team that studied the planet's atmosphere. John had seen her a few times before, always busy with her work, always surrounded by a small group of scientists. But on that day, when a sudden malfunction occurred with the heating system, John found himself face to face with her. As he tried to fix the problem, their movements aligned perfectly, his breath coming out in a soft puff, her own breath catching as she stepped closer to inspect the equipment. It was a simple accident, really, but as their breaths met in the thin, cool air, something unusual happened. They both paused, the warmth from their breaths intertwining for a split second. John noticed it first, a gentle heat, an electric sensation that tingled in the air between them. Aurelia's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing as she seemed to process what had just occurred. She stepped back, a look of surprise crossing her face. "I did not expect that," she said softly, her voice carrying a melodic, alien quality that sent a shiver down John's spine. "What happened?" John asked, his voice tinged with curiosity, not understanding what had just occurred. "It's nothing," Aurelia replied quickly, though the faint flush on her cheeks said otherwise. "It's just our species. We are highly attuned to certain biological cues. Your breath," she hesitated, glancing away, clearly trying to find the right words. "Your breath, it's different. I've never felt anything like it before." John blinked in confusion, unsure how to respond. "Different how?" he asked. Aurelia paused, searching for the right words. "The warmth," she said finally. "It's not just warmth. There's something more to it. A connection, almost." John stared at her, trying to wrap his mind around what she was saying. He had never considered that something as simple as sharing a breath with someone could have any significance. Aurelia seemed to sense his confusion and took a step closer, her eyes softening. "It's a biological trait, one we don't often discuss with outsiders," she explained. "But when two beings from different species share such a close moment, such an intimate exchange of breath, it can signify something more. A bond, perhaps, or an understanding that transcends words." John's heart began to race as he realized the weight of what she was suggesting. It was beautiful, but it was also overwhelming. How could something as simple as breathing together create such a profound connection? As Aurelia stood there, watching him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the room's lights, John felt something stir inside him. It was like a spark, one that was both terrifying and beautiful. "I didn't know," he murmured, almost to himself. "I didn't know something like that could even happen." Aurelia gave a small, understanding smile. "Neither did I, until now." The silence between them grew comfortable, but there was an underlying tension in the air, a recognition that something extraordinary had just happened. They had shared a moment, however brief, that neither of them could explain fully. But perhaps that was the point. There was beauty in the unknown, in the unexpected connections that life sometimes offered. And in that quiet moment, as they both stood there, trying to make sense of the inexplicable, they knew something had changed. They had made a connection, one that neither could have anticipated, but one that would remain with them forever. John found himself in a strange silence, the kind that hung thick in the air between two people who had just shared something unspoken, something powerful. Aurelia stood before him, her violet eyes shining with something he couldn't quite place: curiosity, wonder, maybe even a hint of uncertainty. He felt an unfamiliar warmth flooding his chest, as he processed her words. A bond, she had said. A bond created simply by their shared breath. It was ridiculous to think that something so simple could feel so significant. But as he looked at her, he realized that it wasn't just the warmth of her breath or the closeness of their bodies that made this moment feel important. It was the way she looked at him, the way her presence seemed to pull at him in ways he hadn't expected. He had met many people in his life, humans, aliens, soldiers, scientists, but this felt different. With Aurelia, everything felt more intense, more meaningful. They both stood there, silent for a long moment, unsure of what to say next. The hum of the station's air filters filled the space between them, but it didn't break the quiet. Finally, Aurelia spoke again, her voice softer this time, almost as if she was choosing her words more carefully. "I'm not sure how to explain it," she began, her tone thoughtful. "But when we shared that moment, when our breaths matched like that, it felt like something ancient, like a connection that goes beyond just biology." John swallowed, unsure of what to say. He had no idea what she meant by ancient, but he couldn't deny that something about that moment had felt profound. "I didn't think," he started, then paused, trying to find the right words. "I didn't think it would be like this. I mean, it's just breath, right? Just air." Aurelia smiled, but it wasn't the playful, teasing smile he was used to seeing on other people. This one was deeper, more knowing, as if she understood something about him that he hadn't even realized yet. "Sometimes, human," she said gently, "the smallest moments can carry the greatest significance. You'll learn that here, if you open your mind to it." John blinked at her, her words sinking in slowly. He had never thought of something as simple as breath as holding any kind of deeper meaning. But in that moment, he couldn't help but wonder if there was something to it. As he met her gaze, he saw not just the curiosity and intelligence that he had come to expect from her species, but something else. Something that pulled at him in a way he couldn't ignore. "I think I understand," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure he did. "But why me?" Aurelia's smile softened, and she took a small step closer to him, her presence almost magnetic. "Why not you, John?" she asked quietly. "You're more than you think you are. Maybe this moment, this connection, was meant to happen." Her words left him breathless, and for a moment, he was lost in the intensity of her eyes. There was something about her, something that made him feel like he was on the edge of discovering something larger than himself. He didn't know if it was just the alien influence, or if it was something more. But right then, as they stood in the quiet of the room, everything felt like it was about to change. Aurelia stepped back, breaking the tension, and John's heart began to race. "I guess we have to get back to work," she said, but her voice held a note of hesitation. John nodded, though his mind was still racing with the thoughts that Aurelia had stirred in him. They were both on the same team, working together on a planet far from Earth. But now, things felt different. He couldn't ignore the pull between them, the subtle connection that had formed in that brief, seemingly insignificant moment. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but he knew that whatever happened next, his life was never going to be the same again. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. John had almost forgotten the strange, lingering connection he had felt with Aurelia during that brief moment of shared breath. They continued their work on the station as usual, fixing equipment and handling maintenance tasks. But there was an undeniable shift between them, something unspoken that seemed to linger in the air whenever they were near each other. Aurelia was as composed and professional as ever, but John couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. It wasn't just the way she looked at him now, with a softness in her eyes that wasn't there before. It was the way she seemed to understand him in ways he hadn't expected. She had a way of reading him, his thoughts, his feelings, that felt both comforting and disconcerting. One afternoon, as they worked on a malfunctioning air filtration system, Aurelia handed him a tool, her fingers brushing against his. The touch was light, but it sent a jolt through him. He glanced up at her, and she met his gaze for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Are you all right, John?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. John blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said, his voice slightly more strained than he intended. Aurelia raised an eyebrow but didn't press the matter. Instead, she returned her focus to the system they were fixing. But John couldn't help but feel the tension between them, like something was simmering just beneath the surface, waiting to surface. Later that evening, They found themselves in the break room, sitting across from each other at a small table. John couldn't help but notice how the dim lighting reflected in her violet eyes, giving them an almost otherworldly glow. She was focused on her meal, but every so often, she would glance up at him, and their eyes would meet. Each time, it felt like an unspoken understanding passed between them, something deeper than words. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day," John said, breaking the silence. "About the connection." Aurelia's eyes flickered with curiosity, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a sip of her drink, her fingers curling around the cup. "You've been thinking about it?" she asked, her voice almost teasing, though there was a softness in her tone that wasn't there before. John nodded, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. "Yeah, I never thought that something like breathing could be so meaningful." Aurelia's lips curved into a small smile, and she set her cup down, her gaze softening. "Sometimes, it's the simplest things that have the most meaning," she said quietly. "And sometimes, those things can create connections that we don't fully understand. But that doesn't make them any less real." John stared at her, his heart racing. Her words, her presence, it all felt like something he couldn't explain. The way she spoke, the way she looked at him, it was like she was pulling him in, making him feel something he had never felt before. "I don't know what to do with all of this," John admitted, his voice low. It's overwhelming." Aurelia leaned back in her chair, her posture relaxed, but her eyes never leaving his. "You don't have to do anything," she said gently. "Sometimes it's enough to just be present, to let things unfold in their own time. You don't have to force it." John felt a strange sense of relief wash over him, as if Aurelia had somehow read his thoughts. For a brief moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their unspoken understanding filling the room. The air between them felt charged, alive with possibility, and for the first time since arriving on Aurelian, John felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The connection between them, however strange, however unexpected, was undeniable. And though neither of them knew where it would lead, there was a quiet comfort in the knowledge that they didn't have to figure it all out right away. For now, it was enough just to be with each other, to let the moments stretch out in a way that felt right. And as they sat there, sharing a quiet meal, John realized that the most important thing wasn't understanding the connection, but accepting it for what it was, something beautiful, something meaningful, something worth exploring. The days continued to pass on Aurelian, and the quiet moments between John and Aurelia seemed to multiply. They worked side by side, but the unspoken bond that had begun to form between them lingered like a shadow, present in every glance, every shared silence. John still didn't fully understand what had transpired between them, but there was a part of him that didn't want to. Some things, he realized, didn't need to be explained. As they spent more time together, John found himself growing more comfortable in her presence. He had always been a man of action, of solving problems with his hands, but with Aurelia, it was different. There were no simple answers, no easy fixes. Their relationship, whatever it was becoming, was complicated in the most unexpected ways. Aurelia, for her part, was as enigmatic as ever, but there was a gentleness to her now, something softer that had slowly crept into her demeanor. The way she laughed, the way she touched his shoulder casually as they worked, it was as though she was letting her guard down, just a little, with him. One evening, after a particularly long day of repairs, John found himself sitting on the station's observation deck, staring out at the stars. The expanse of space stretched out before him, infinite and indifferent. It was a sight he had seen many times before, but tonight, it felt different. It felt like the stars were just a little closer, a little more real. He heard footsteps behind him, and without turning around, he knew it was her. "I thought I might find you here," Aurelia said softly. "Can I join you?" Without waiting for an answer, she took a seat beside him, the cool metallic surface of the deck barely noticeable beneath them. They sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound the faint hum of the station's machinery. "I've been thinking," John said finally, his voice quiet, "about what you said the other day, about the connection." Aurelia glanced at him, her violet eyes meeting his in the soft light. "And," she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I think I understand it now," he continued. "It's not something you can just explain. It's something you feel, something that happens without you even realizing it. Something like our breaths meeting." Aurelia smiled, a slow, knowing smile that warmed her face. "I'm glad you're beginning to understand," she said. "It's not always easy to explain things like that, but you're right. Some connections aren't meant to be explained. They just are." John turned to her, his gaze steady. "I don't know what's happening between us, Aurelia," he said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But I feel something. Something I've never felt before." "I feel it too," Aurelia replied, her voice almost a whisper. "It's hard to ignore, isn't it?" She paused, her eyes searching his. "But we don't have to figure it all out right now. We don't have to put a label on it." John nodded slowly. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since arriving on Aurelian, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "I guess we'll just have to see where this goes," he said, his voice tinged with a quiet sense of acceptance. Aurelia's smile widened, and she leaned back slightly, her posture relaxed. "I think that's all we can do," she said. For a long time, they simply sat there together, watching the stars, letting the quiet between them speak volumes. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for the moment, it didn't matter. The connection they shared was real, and that was enough. As the weeks went by, John and Aurelia found themselves falling into a comfortable routine. The work was demanding, but there was a rhythm to it that kept them busy enough to avoid the questions that lingered between them. Yet, even in the busiest moments, the connection they had shared that night on the observation deck never fully left his mind. There were times when their eyes would meet across a crowded room, and he would feel that same pull, that same warmth, like something was quietly building between them. One day, as they worked in the station's main lab, John caught a glimpse of Aurelia from across the room. She was bent over a console, her hair shimmering in the soft light of the workroom, her focused expression making her look every bit the expert she was. But there was something in the way she moved, something different, as though her usual composure had been replaced with something more vulnerable, something unspoken. He walked over to her, his footsteps soft against the floor. "Aurelia," he called gently. She looked up, her violet eyes meeting his, and he saw a flicker of something in them. Uncertainty, maybe. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "What's on your mind?" John asked, his voice laced with concern. Aurelia hesitated for a moment, then set down the tool she was working with and straightened up. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, her voice soft but steady, "about what you said the other day, about letting things unfold. I think I've been trying too hard to understand everything, to figure it all out." John could see the conflict in her eyes. She was the one who had always seemed so certain, so in control, but now there was a vulnerability to her that he hadn't seen before. "It's okay not to have all the answers," he said quietly. "I'm not expecting you to have everything figured out. We're in this together, right?" Her eyes softened, and she took a small step closer to him, her hand brushing against his arm. "Yes, together," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. There was a moment of silence, just the two of them standing there, the weight of their shared experience hanging in the air. Then, Aurelia gave a small, almost wistful smile. I think I'm starting to understand that, too. Maybe I don't need to understand everything right now. Maybe we just need to be here, in this moment." John nodded, feeling a weight lift off his chest. He had always been a man of action, someone who needed to fix things. But with Aurelia, he was starting to realize that sometimes the best thing you could do was just be present. No need for answers, no need for solutions. Just being together. As the days passed, the bond between them grew, not from grand gestures or elaborate explanations, but from the quiet moments they shared. They worked side by side, they laughed together during breaks, and they found comfort in the simple presence of one another. And in that quiet companionship, John began to feel something he hadn't expected, something deep, something real. It wasn't the fiery passion he had imagined when he first arrived on Aurelian. It was something steadier, something that grew stronger with each passing day, something that felt like it could last. One evening, as the station's lights dimmed and the hum of machinery filled the background, John found himself sitting on the same observation deck where he and Aurelia had shared their first quiet conversation. He leaned back, staring at the stars, his thoughts drifting. After a few minutes, he heard footsteps approach, and he knew without turning around that it was her. "Mind if I join you?" Aurelia's voice was soft, and John could hear the smile in her tone. He turned to face her, a smile of his own tugging at the corners of his lips. Of course, he replied. She sat down next to him, her presence calming in the stillness of the night. They sat in silence for a while, simply watching the stars, each lost in their own thoughts. And yet, in that silence, there was an understanding between them, a quiet connection that spoke louder than words. John realized then that it didn't matter what the future held. What mattered was that, for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. He had found something here, something unexpected, and he was content to let it unfold, one moment at a time. John had always considered himself a man of action, someone who thrived on solving problems and finding practical solutions. But in the days that followed their quiet conversations, something had begun to shift within him. The connection with Aurelia, though unspoken, had grown deeper. It was no longer just about the work they did together or the occasional laughter during breaks. It was about something more, something he couldn't quite put into words. And he realized that he didn't need to understand it all. Some things simply were. The next morning, after another night spent looking up at the stars, John found himself in the lab again, working with Aurelia. There was a familiar comfort in their shared silence, a rhythm to their work. As they moved around the lab, checking systems and running diagnostics, John couldn't help but glance at her every now and then. She was focused, as always, her brow furrowed in concentration, but there was a softness in her expression that hadn't been there before. She caught his eye for a brief moment and smiled, a quiet, understanding smile. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a warmth through him that made his heart beat just a little faster. "You're quiet today," Aurelia said, her voice gentle as she adjusted a piece of equipment. John cleared his throat, trying to shake off the sudden wave of emotion that had risen within him. "Just thinking," he said, his voice a little rougher than usual. "About everything. I don't know what it is, but being here with you, it feels right." Aurelia paused for a moment, her gaze softening as she looked at him. "I know what you mean," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been feeling the same way." There was a silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, a quiet understanding that neither of them needed to verbalize. John realized, then, that he didn't need to figure it all out. He didn't need to know what the future held or what this connection between them would become. What mattered was that they were here, now, sharing this moment. He reached for a nearby tool, his hand brushing against hers in the process. It was a simple touch, but it felt significant, like it had been a long time coming. Aurelia didn't pull away, instead meeting his gaze with a slight smile, a knowing look in her eyes. "You're not alone in this, John," she said softly. "Whatever happens, whatever this is between us, we're in it together." John's heart skipped a beat, and, for a moment, the weight of her words settled over him, wrapping him in a sense of peace he hadn't known he needed. They continued their work, side by side, but now there was something more to their actions. There was a quiet bond, a deep connection that neither of them had expected but both had embraced. As the day wore on, and they continued their tasks, John couldn't help but feel like he was exactly where he needed to be. No longer just a technician on a far-off planet, no longer just a man trying to make sense of the universe. He was here with Aurelia, and that was enough. When the workday ended and they both stood together on the observation deck, staring at the endless stars that stretched out before them, John realized something. He didn't need to search for meaning or purpose anymore. He had found it in the quiet moments shared with Aurelia. Together, they were enough. The station had a way of making time feel both infinite and fleeting. John had been there for several months now, working alongside Aurelia, but the days seemed to blur together. Yet, in all that time, there was one thing that never changed, the quiet connection between them. It wasn't something they talked about, but it was always there, a silent understanding that held them together, no matter how busy the days became. They continued to work, side by side, solving problems and making sure the station ran smoothly. But as the days passed, John began to realize that there was more to their partnership than just tasks and duty. It was something deeper, something unspoken. One afternoon, as they worked on calibrating the station's power grid, John caught Aurelia glancing at him, her eyes lingering just a little longer than usual. He turned toward her, but she quickly looked away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. He could feel his own heart rate pick up, the warmth of her gaze still fresh in his mind. He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the sudden tension in the air. "Is everything running smoothly?" he asked, his voice a little too loud for the quiet of the room. Aurelia nodded, her hands still moving over the control panel, but her voice was soft when she answered. Everything's fine. Just thinking. John raised an eyebrow, stepping closer to her. About what? About us, she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. About this, whatever this is. Her words caught him off guard. He had been thinking the same thing, but hearing her say it out loud made it feel more real, more tangible. He leaned against the console, his gaze fixed on her. I've been thinking about it too, he admitted. I don't know what this is, but I know it's something. Aurelia turned to face him fully, her violet eyes locking onto his. I don't have all the answers, John, she said quietly. But maybe we don't need them right now. Maybe we're just meant to be here, in this moment, together. Her words hit him harder than he expected. There was something in the way she said them, something that made him realize how much he had come to care for her. It wasn't just the work they shared, or the time they spent together. It was the quiet moments, the way they understood each other without needing to say a word. He reached out, his hand brushing hers as he spoke. I don't think I've ever met anyone like you, Aurelia. She smiled, a small, knowing smile that made his heart skip a beat. I feel the same way, she replied. The room was quiet again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was a warmth between them, a shared understanding that filled the space. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for the first time, John felt like he didn't need to. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. As the days turned into weeks, their bond grew stronger. They spent more time together, both in and out of the lab, finding comfort in each other's presence. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when they both questioned what they were doing. But every time they looked at each other, every time they shared a quiet conversation or a fleeting touch, they knew they were exactly where they needed to be. One evening, after another long day of work, John found himself once again on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. Aurelia joined him shortly after, standing beside him, her presence familiar and reassuring. They didn't need to say anything. They simply stood there, side by side, watching the stars and letting the silence between them speak volumes. It was in that quiet, in that simple moment, that John realized something important. He had come to Aurelian expecting nothing more than a job, a way to pass the time. But in Aurelia, he had found something far more valuable. He had found someone who understood him in ways he never thought possible. And as they stood together, watching the stars, John knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. As the days turned into weeks, John and Aurelia's connection deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. It wasn't just the quiet moments on the observation deck or the occasional brush of hands during their work that kept them bound together. It was something intangible, something that neither of them had words for, but both felt in every interaction. The station, with its sterile walls and constant hum of machinery, became a backdrop to the growing bond between them. They continued to work side by side, their tasks often blending together, their focus shifting naturally between the technical details of the station and the unspoken understanding they had developed. John had always been a man of action, one who focused on results and tangible outcomes. But with Aurelia, he realized that some things couldn't be measured or quantified. There was a comfort in the silence they shared, in the way their thoughts seemed to align without words. One evening, after they had finished a particularly challenging task, they found themselves once again on the observation deck, the stars stretching out before them like an endless canvas. It had become their place, quiet, peaceful, and far from the demands of their work. John leaned against the railing, gazing out into the vastness of space, his mind lost in thought. Aurelia stood beside him, her presence as steady and calming as always. I've been thinking, she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. John turned his head toward her, meeting her gaze. About what? He asked. Aurelia's eyes were distant for a moment, as though she was searching for the right words. About how much has changed, she said, her tone reflective. When I first came here, I never imagined I'd find someone like you. John felt his heart skip a beat at her words. He had never been one for grand displays of emotion, but something about the way she said that made him feel like they had crossed some invisible line. I feel the same way, he replied quietly. I came here thinking I was just going to do my job and move on. But now, I can't imagine it any other way. The stars above them seemed to shine a little brighter in that moment, as though they, too, were acknowledging the shift that had taken place. The bond between John and Aurelia had grown beyond the confines of the station, beyond the tasks they had completed together. It had become something deeper, something that neither of them could fully explain, but both of them knew was real. As they stood there, side by side, John realized that they didn't need to have all the answers. They didn't need to define what was happening between them. What mattered was that they had found each other in this vast, quiet universe, and in that moment, nothing else seemed as important. Aurelia reached out, her hand brushing lightly against his. It was a simple touch, but it spoke volumes. John looked down at their intertwined fingers, feeling the warmth of her touch seep into him. "We've been through a lot together, haven't we?" he said, his voice low. Aurelia nodded, her smile softening. "Yes, we have, and I think it's just the beginning." The night stretched on, the stars continuing their quiet watch over the two of them. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, John didn't feel afraid. He felt at peace, and with Aurelia by his side, he knew they would face whatever came next, together. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet kind of happiness. John and Aurelia's bond had grown deeper, their connection growing stronger with each passing day. It was no longer just about the work they did together or the moments they shared in passing. It was about understanding each other in ways that went beyond words. John had never thought much about connections, not until he met Aurelia. He had always been a practical man, focused on the immediate, the tangible. But now, with her by his side, he was beginning to realize that not everything needed to be fixed, not everything needed to be understood. Some things simply existed, and that was enough. They spent their days fixing equipment, maintaining the station, and tackling whatever problems arose. But, in the quiet moments between tasks, when their hands brushed or their eyes met across the room, John felt a deeper connection with her. It was a bond that needed no explanation. Aurelia, too, had come to see their relationship in a new light. She had always been strong, independent, and self-sufficient. But with John, there was something different. She found herself letting go of the walls she had built around herself, opening up to him in ways she never had before. One evening, after a particularly long day, they found themselves alone in the break room, the soft hum of the station's machinery in the background. The world outside was quiet, the stars shining brightly in the distance. John sat at the table, a cup of coffee in his hands, staring out the window. Aurelia stood nearby, her gaze fixed on him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. John glanced up at her, meeting her gaze. "I'm thinking about how much has changed," he said quietly. "When I first came here, I didn't expect to find any of this. I didn't expect to find you." Aurelia smiled, her heart swelling at his words. "I didn't expect it either," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "But I'm glad we found each other." There was a long silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, a shared understanding that didn't need to be spoken. John set his coffee down and stood up, walking over to her. He reached out, his hand gently brushing against hers. Aurelia's breath caught at the touch, a soft shiver running down her spine. "I think I've been afraid of this," John said, his voice low. "Afraid of letting myself feel this way. But with you, it just feels right." Aurelia looked up at him, her violet eyes soft and filled with emotion. "You don't have to be afraid, John," she said quietly. "We're in this together. Whatever this is, we'll face it together." He nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly at peace. He had never imagined that something like this could happen, that he could find a connection so strong, so real. But with Aurelia, everything felt different. She had become more than just a colleague, more than just a friend. She had become someone he could see himself with, someone who made him feel like he wasn't alone in the universe. As they stood there, their hands intertwined, the silence between them was no longer just a pause. It was a promise. A promise that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The stars outside the window seemed to shine a little brighter, and John knew that no matter where they went, no matter what came next, they would always have each other. And in that quiet, in that shared moment, John realized that he had found something he had never even known he was searching for. He had found someone who understood him, who made him feel whole in a way he never thought possible. And with that realization, he knew that the journey ahead, whatever it might be, would be more than worth it.